Give it about 10 more seconds before we get started. Okay, well, welcome to today's Environment and Energy Leader webinar, sponsored by Montrose Environmental Group in partnership with some of their partners, Renewable Energy Projects Lessons Learned in the US and Canada. I'm very excited for this event. We are going to hear from experts on their case studies, and I know we are ready to jump into this. But before we really get started with the content for today, we do want to go over a few housekeeping items with all attendees. This event is being recorded, so if you are not able to view it live with us now, you will be able to watch it later on. Just as those who are on with us live, you will be able to rewatch this event as well. If you have questions for today's panelists, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. We will do our very best to get to all of the questions before the top of the hour. That being said, if we do not get a chance to answer your specific question before today's event is over, we will be following up with you with a list of all of the questions submitted as well as answers. So don't worry. If you are having any issues during today's event, please feel free to send a direct message to me, Jessica Hunt, through the chat button, and I will do my best to help you solve whatever problem that is. You can also use the chat to let us know where you're joining from, why you decided to jump on with us today. And it's a place for attendees to be able to communicate. At this point, I am going to turn the presentation over to Heather, and I look forward to rejoining you for the panel later on.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our webinar today, Renewable Energy Projects, Lessons Learned in the US and Canada. We have an exciting webinar set up here for you today. My background is I have about 24 years of experience in natural resource consulting and project management. And about 10 of those years, I've been working pretty much directly with renewable energy clients, mainly in the solar, battery energy storage, and wind sectors. One thing we're going to try to do is tell a quick fun fact every time we've got a new panelist. So a fun fact about me is that I recently obtained a scuba diving certification to be an open water diver, and I've been having a great time exploring some of our underwater environments across the lower 48 states. So let's see, next slide, please. So a little bit about Montrose. Montrose, our mission is to help our clients solve environmental problems. We're a publicly traded organization with over 3,500 employees in 95 offices across the world. We have a really diverse client base in the oil, gas, and renewable sector, and we also work with federal agencies and commercial manufacturers, et cetera, all over the world. Next slide. We work under a strategic kind of integrated solutions model. This model kind of focuses on improving water quality and air quality, including greenhouse gas mitigation, to help move our clients towards their net zero pledges. In the renewable sector specifically, we engage our multidisciplinary consulting and engineering services to support our clients' projects throughout the greenfield and the brownfield development stage. Next slide, please. So we've got 4 folks on today's panel, including myself, and we'll introduce ourselves at the beginning of each case study that we present to you today. Our case studies are going to kind of flow very similarly across, starting with an opportunity, which kind of basically describes some of the project background, general project background. And then we're going to move into some challenges that we faced in each of these projects as a team. And then we'll finish up each case study going through some solutions that we devised to take care of the project's challenges. But before we get into the case study, I wanted to touch a little bit on the why. Why renewable energy? Why is it important? Next slide, please. So, and I'm sure many folks on today's panel are aware of many of these issues and of these reasons for renewable energy and the movement towards the clean energy economy. But renewables are inexhaustible energy. There's a never-ending supply of wind, sun, and water, and it's free. As our global population grows, renewable energy can sustain our energy needs and reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, which emit greenhouse gases. In the United States, the recently passed 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which just turned 2 years old about 4 days ago, by the way. That act is the most significant climate legislation in history, offering funding, programs, and incentives to accelerate the country's transition to a clean energy economy. And the current Permitting Reform Act bill sitting right now in the Senate is another example of recent legislation that, if passed, will streamline the renewable energy permitting process in the United States. In Canada, on the other side of the border, Canada being a world leader in clean power, Canada's 2030 emissions reduction plan and smart renewables and electrification pathways program is investing $1.5 billion over the next 8 years for renewable energy and electrical grid modernization projects. So these regulatory drivers, the fact that renewables are inexhaustible, and ESG goals, environmental, social, and governance goals that are being set up and becoming the core fabric of many businesses, governments, institutions. All of these things have led to the inclusion of renewable energy use as opposed to traditional fossil fuel energy to help move us all towards our net zero goals. So it's just making more and more sense. Okay, so before I get started into my case study, we're going to give the attendees a few seconds to answer a poll question at the beginning of each case study. All right, I see the poll question 1 is up. So we're curious to know what stage of the renewable energy project process you are involved in. So as you answer that, we're going to go on to the first case study. Thanks, Lauren. All right. Okay, so I'm covering the North Carolina, excuse me, North Carolina Community Solar Portfolio. Excuse me, I'll drink of water real quick. Sorry about that. Getting over an illness. Okay, so the goal of the community scale solar portfolio in North Carolina was to really bring clean energy projects to more rural areas across the coastal plain of North Carolina. There were certain energy targets and goals set by various local electric management cooperatives, but the projects themselves, oh, and go ahead, next slide. The projects themselves spanned across 5 different counties in North Carolina, all within the kind of intercoastal plain and Piedmont areas. Each project ranged between 2 megawatt AC to 5 megawatt AC in size. So, distributed generation size, smaller size. And once built, these are all now operated and managed by local electric membership cooperatives. Next slide. So some of the project challenges that we faced as a team moving into this portfolio is that each project was, except for with one exception, the project located in Wake County, North Carolina. Each project was located in a rural area. Some of these areas, there was a lot of just general unfamiliarity with solar projects. Um, in some of these counties, this was the first solar project for that county to come in. The dominant land use was agriculture in all of these, except for Wake mainly, Wake County. And at some of the hearings, we were finding that a lot of neighbors and surrounding landowners had a kind of a general fear of change in land use. So, excuse me, that coupled with lack of ordinances on the solar projects themselves, um, unclear setbacks on what setback widths needed to be, etc. All of those things led to a lot of challenges during the project design and the layouts. So we worked together as a multidisciplinary team to tackle some of these. Next slide, please. So again, we put together a multidisciplinary team. We had surveyors, scientists on this team, civil engineers, electrical, and carried these projects from early site due diligence all the way through notice to proceed and stamp sealed drawings that were ready for the engineering, procurement, and construction contractor. During the course of the site development, we established biweekly working design meetings to work in real time on different site constraints we were running into with setbacks or fatal flaws, cultural issues, anything, wetland streams, anything that came up. We dealt with it in real time during the design. When it came to special use and conditional use permit time, we attended in person, or if it was online, we attended the hearings in person with the client's attorney to address questions right there at the podium alongside our client and the attorney. So to date, all of these projects have been approved, built, and are online, servicing those local communities. And we are continuing to support a couple of those projects during their operation phase. So really exciting case study. And with that, I'm wrapping up here. So with that, I am going to segue over to Delaney, who will go into her case study in Canada. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Heather. Yeah, I'm here representing Canada. I've been watching where everybody's from. I see a few familiar faces from here in Calgary. For those who don't know me, my name is Delaney Player, and I'm a principal wildlife biologist at Montrose. I've been working as a biologist for the past 23 years and started working on renewable projects in 2008. Around 2016, I started working on a lot more renewable projects focused on solar, and I support permitting and construction of those projects, as well as batteries, wind, and other renewable energy technologies. A little tidbit about me is that my passion is bat biology, and I've handled many of the species of the bats that we have in Canada and the US. And sometimes I even go on trips to find new little bat friends. I think we're going to have a poll question come up. There it is. So the question this time is, what power market do you work in? Perfect. Next slide, please. So for my brief case study, I'll talk about a large solar project in Canada. So this is the Travers Solar Project. It's a 465 megawatt AC solar project on 3,300 acres of land near Vulcan, Alberta, Canada. As Heather's noted, Canada's been moving towards increasing renewable energy production over the past few years, and Alberta has been a key area for several reasons. We have great solar resource in the southern part of the province, and we also have a deregulated market. For Travers itself, it's very large. As mentioned, I have the size there, which is about equivalent to 1,600 Canadian football fields or 2,000 American football fields for the folks from the US on the call. And it can power about 100,000 homes annually. The environmental work for the project started in about 2017. The project was fully permitted and approved in 2019, and construction started in 2021. And the commercial operation date you can see there was late 2022, and it is currently in operations. Overall, the project was well sited. It was on cultivated lands. It had low wildlife use during baseline surveys, and mitigations were provided throughout to further reduce the risk. The project was also ranked as a low risk from an environmental perspective by provincial regulators, which was good. And it was a great project to increase renewable energy production here in Alberta. Next slide, please. Moving on to some of the challenges, as I've said a couple times, the project lands are very large. So given this, we had to consider how we would survey the full area, what data was needed, and how we would appropriately evaluate the risk. We also had to decide if there were additional mitigation measures needed based on what we found and the size of the project. Similar to what Heather said, this was also one of the first industrial scale solar projects that folks in this area had been exposed to as well. So we did have a lot of questions around the permitting process, around how we were going to survey the areas, what we were going to do about vegetation, soil management, weeds, and fire risk. So those things were all considered during the assessments. Given the size of the project as well, we did consider that it was going to be multi-year construction. So we had to consider how that would impact the environmental risks. What would happen over winter on those lands under construction? Would there be an increased risk that we need to take into factors such as erosion or water management concerns? Next slide, please. So for some of the solutions that we had is we created a multidisciplinary project team that was involved through the entire process of the project. So from the early days when we went out and did surveys and we were starting to understand what was there on the land, through permitting, through working on construction as well. We had key contributions from vegetation, wetlands, soils, and ESC specialists. So a fairly broad team of environmental folks that were at the table to make sure that we were considering all the different factors for this project and what environmental risks it could pose. One of the key actions that we took is we worked very closely with the EPC contractor for 8 to 10 months prior to the start of construction. So a lot of this would be talking through their design plans, understanding what they were going to do for grading and such, so that we could make sure that aligned with the environmental commitments and provide any other feedback or management that was needed. We also worked really closely with the regulators to ensure that they were engaged in the process. They knew the project goals and they knew what documents we had in place, and they had time to review them and contribute. We continue to support through operations. As I mentioned, the project is up and operating. So that was a brief little bit of some of the challenges and some of the solutions we had for the table for Traverse. And I will turn it over to Ethan now for his case study.
Thank you, Delaney. My name is Ethan Yonke. I'm a senior project manager here at Montrose. Been here for about 2.5 years. I've got almost 30 years of experience in environmental work. Probably about 14 of the last 14 years, I've been working in renewable energy, and probably have worked on somewhere between 7 and 10 gigawatts of projects, anywhere from wetland delineations to permitting and regulatory community engagement type work. Here today, we're going to talk about the Western U.S. wind project that we have. But first, I think we have a poll that we want to talk about. And the third poll is, what are your biggest challenges to getting your projects online? Next slide, please. So I'm here to discuss this wind farm out west. It is still being worked on at this point, but we are 3 years in. So it's going to be about 300 megawatts. That's enough power, probably around 150,000 homes. It's 23,000 acres in size. Right now, we're looking at about 55 turbines. And that's all dependent upon the technology when it comes around. Right now we have, there's 2 landowners that are ranchers. Some are with sheep and some are with cattle. It is, as you can see on that map, it's surrounded by federal in the green and gray, and then state land on the blue. It's also a former uranium mine site, and there's a historic World War II bombing range nearby, which is pretty interesting because you can still see the bullseye in the ground that is now full of sagebrush. Next slide, please. Well, I'm here to talk about wildlife issues and specifically avian wildlife issues. We have a large concentration of raptors. If you look at that map, we have raptors surrounding the site. We have several other issues in that area. Small birds. We have swift fox, and a handful of other things, bats as well, as everyone probably knows who's in the wind industry. We also have issues with access. One of the landowners is pretty tight about us during lambing season when the sheep are taking care of their lambs. So we actually have 3 years of pre-construction studies. The first year we went out there was a couple miles west of here, and we realized pretty quickly that the resources were too deep in this area in terms of some nests and whatnot. So we moved it to the east. And one of the issues that we have to work around is the 2-mile buffers around golden eagle nests. And so in this area that we found after 2 years of studies, we have been able to find and thread the needle between these areas. We have to get an agreement with the state wildlife agency in order to get the permit, the state permit at the end. So all in all, we're trying to gather data to look at what type of mitigation we can do to get these wind turbines within this area, while at the same time trying to continue the same kind of land management practices that the ranchers want to continue. Next slide, please. So our solution was basically to come up with some management tools for some databases that we created, specifically Survey 123. It's a ArcGIS Esri-based product, which allows us to take all of our surveys and to put the data in the surveys, but also to include these flight path layers, which is kind of revolutionary for some folks because we're able to create hotspots with that information, as well as flyways with that information. We included perching locations, foraging success from golden eagles. And yes, lambs are one of the biggest reasons for mortality is golden eagles. Any kind of interactions or incidentals that we've seen out there. We're able to put this into this database. And we coordinated with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the local state agency on mitigation strategies. So our early coordination with these folks, I mean, we started 3 years ago, literally talking to them because some other nearby wind farms were having issues. And so we started with them, walked them through, been out to the site with them, and have created some pretty interesting mitigation opportunities, including Identiflight, which is a radar DARPA-based software and imagery process that will you lay it out in the field, and it will shut down a turbine or a couple turbines based upon where these eagles are flying or these raptors are flying. In Europe, they're starting to paint some turbine blades black. They've seen a 70% decrease in mortality on some of these sites. So we're starting to look into that as well as carcass removal, going in and making sure if there is any type of mortality with sheep or cows or cattle, we get in there and get them out because that attracts eagles. And also looking at grazing rotation with the sheep and being strategic about it and time-wise about where we want to put those sheep. So with that, I'd send you to Chris Jadak with his case study in Maine.
Thanks, Ethan. And hello, everyone. My name is Chris Jadak, and I am the practice leader for Montrose for brownfields and community revitalization. Fun fact about me is I live in Seattle right now, but I grew up north of the border in the second biggest London in the world, London, Ontario. I got a degree in civil environmental engineering. and I've spent the last 23 years in the United States as an environmental consultant. My work travel and my personal travel have led me to 46 states throughout the country. I'm just missing 4 to complete the 50. And as a national practice leader, I get the fun job of helping a wide variety of clients throughout the country eliminate funding gaps and develop strategies to fund a wide range of programs and projects in the environmental space. So today I'm going to talk to you about a project for an existing client of ours in Maine and how they're leveraging some of the funding that was made available through the Inflation Reduction Act to fund a really cool project that involves renewable energy. So next slide. So last November, EPA put out guidelines for an exciting new program called Environmental and Climate Justice Community Change Grants. They have $2 billion of funding available on a rolling basis until it's gone, or the last date to apply is November 21st of 2024. So this is ongoing. If you're preparing an application or have been slow to start and think of one, they last month issued a notice of award for about $350 million of the $2 billion. So there's still funding available, although there's a high level of effort for putting these together. So you got to start quickly. You can apply for up to $20 million of grants, and the grants have to involve a pollution reduction strategy and a climate action strategy. So our client, the Anson-Madison Sanitary District, is located in central Maine, and they have a pretty broad service area, much of which qualifies as distressed, census tracts because of primarily low-income rural populations. And so they had designed a $45 million upgrade to their existing wastewater treatment plant facility, and the goal is to treat PFAS down to acceptable discharge levels for the Kennebec River. And of course, with most significant funding projects, they had a funding gap to eliminate. So we looked at whether this project was a fit for EPA's new program. Next slide. So one of the challenges was in order to apply for this funding and fit this wastewater treatment plant project into EPA's priorities for their new program, we had to identify a main pollution reduction strategy as well as a main climate action strategy. And so the pollution reduction strategy was pretty clear. PFAS is a contaminant that is in wastewater streams pretty much everywhere throughout America. And the major goal of this project was to put new infrastructure into the treatment plant so that there were acceptable discharge levels to their receiving waters, which were the Kennebec River that flows to Maine, to the coastline, the Atlantic Ocean. And so another feature of this was how to build in the climate action strategy. And our client actually owns a landfill next to their wastewater treatment plant, and it's a closed landfill, and it's actually suitable for installing a solar array and a microgrid. Another theme of EPA's new program is energy resilient and emissions reduction development on brownfields. So that tied in nicely as well. The solar array and microgrid component of the project is roughly $5 million that they're asking for that. With tax credits, that gets reduced down to $3.6 million. Other funding, challenges were, fitting, the $20 million project cap and it being part of a larger project. And EPA is not allowing folks to ask for extensions. So you get 3 years to spend the $20 million, and doing that all and having all the permitting and construction completed is a challenge. It being a new program is a challenge. So you don't have templates. You are working alongside the regulators and their technical assistance providers to kind of blaze the trail and create compliant projects that can feasibly be completed. And then another element was working in community-based organizations and getting the community meaningful involvement into the project. And in this case, that means working with tribal entities and other community stakeholders to become a part of, understanding where PFAS is, where it's coming from, and how it can be mitigated. Next slide. So these are some of the statistics for the outputs of the solar array and microgrid. It's anticipated that up to 30% of our clients' energy uses will be funded by it. And if you do the math on, a $5 million investment and an annual savings of energy of $340,000 per year, it's estimated that in 10 to 15 years, they'll recoup the investment that's being made to create the solar array. So I would love to hear from you folks, during the Q&A on questions you might have related to environmental and climate justice community change grants. And I'm also interested in, follow up if you want to hear about the lessons learned we've had. This wasn't our only application through this new program where we've helped about 8 entities throughout the country and a wide range of projects. So love to see if we can help you vet, a potential application. Next slide. So to recap, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act really is, amounting to generational opportunities for funding for renewable energy and other environmentally focused projects. The economic advantage, with renewable energy, more than justifies the cost. And, some of these programs are requiring, collaborations between public and private entities and community-based organizations. But, there's a lot of solutions that, benefit from stakeholders being involved. And it's a good thing going forward. So I think we're going to go from here into questions from the panel.
Yes, thank you so much. And we have had quite a few questions come in as well as comments regarding different parts of the case studies. So I'm going to invite all panelists to join me on screen now, and we are going to get started with the second half of today's event. And just a reminder, if we don't get a chance to answer your specific question that you submitted during the event, the panelists will have a copy of the questions and will be answering them. And then Montrose is going to be kind enough to send out a full document with the questions as well as all of the answers post-event. And if you are watching this on demand and you have questions, please feel free to submit them as well. So let's get started. This question is for Ethan and Delaney. And Delaney, I'd love to hear from you first. And then Ethan, if you have information to follow up, that would be great. So after site control or a lease is obtained, how long do your projects typically take from early site due diligence to the issue for construction and notice to proceed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say I can give you the rainbows and butterflies version first of what would happen. Is that usually I would say to get through all the environmental surveys and such, to complete all of those and make it through permitting and to get a permit, it's usually somewhere between 18 months to 2 years. That's when things go well and such. And after that 2-year period, the timing to get further on and to start construction obviously is dependent on how fast a developer moves the project forward, how fast they get an EPC on board, the size of the project, and what sort of constraints they need to deal with. If you end up in a situation where there's public opposition or other things, that approval process obviously can take longer as you move through a hearing or other answering regulatory questions and such.
Great. Ethan, has that been your experience as well?
Well, with solar, sure. Yeah, that's
Oh
about
yeah,
right.
very good point.
Yeah. Solar, you know, you can go in places in Texas or even Nebraska where there's really no conditional use permits required. Or you can go to Michigan and have a township issue, right? Or a state issue that takes a while, or you just need parts. Or if you're going into WAPA, you need the NEPA, right? Wind, what we're finding now in most of our wind projects is that the Fish and Wildlife Service really want at least 2 years of surveys. You can submit some of your permits before that second year is done because you have a pretty good idea. And by the time they actually look at it, they can it'll probably be approved and all your studies will be done. Um, but I would say for wind, it's probably a lot longer, anywhere from 24 months to um, seeing 4 years, right? So it just depends. And right now we're seeing some of our clients have issues with transformers and equipment that's several years out.
That's one of the follow-up questions I was going to ask is what are some of
Mhm.
the biggest obstacles your clients are experiencing during the permitting process?
You want me to answer that one, or do you want Delaney?
Ethan, feel free. Yeah. Ethan,
All
feel
right.
free to continue. And then maybe if
All right.
Delaney, you have a different,
Okay.
if you have some other obstacles, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things right now. We're dealing with a little bit harsher restrictions on eagles. They went from half-a-mile buffer to 2 mile buffer here in the west in Region 6, and the requirements for additional surveys. Wetlands are always just an issue because right now we can't get anything out of the Corps. We're looking for jurisdictional determination. They sent us a letter the other day. It said it's going to be at least a year before they see that. So we're looking at if you can do a self-certification, something like that, we're looking at that. But and permitting, the biggest issue with permitting, I would say, the number one thing I would tell everybody, every one of our clients, and anyone who's listening, please go out and make sure before you do this project that you have talked to commissioners and some of the neighbors and make sure that they are on board or that they can be persuaded. Because in some of these newer rural areas, we're seeing some folks that are pretty malinformed, misinformed. We've had people call us, Chinese space lasers conductors in town hall meetings, community meetings. So we've seen some strange things, and it's getting out there in front of that is key. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would build on that as well and definitely agree. And I think sometimes there is still some permitting that's required after you have your main approvals in place generally, associated with wetlands, and that can take quite a while and can surprise developers, especially if you're going to have impacts to wetlands that's going to add on to the timeline before you can start construction. I think Ethan quickly mentioned procurement as well in the US, which is a similar problem in Canada, if not worse in certain cases, that can impact that development timeline. And then we have had just several changes across Canada from the provincial government's perspectives on how they're treating the industry and what their expectations are on how you permit a project. So it can be, yeah, the expectations are always changing, and it can be difficult to stay on top of them.
Oh, I can understand that. And I promised Chris and Heather we're going to get to you, but I just know there are some other follow-up questions coming on to the conversation that we're having right now. Ethan, you mentioned, going out into the community and talking to different stakeholders. So what are the type of questions that you advise your clients to ask before beginning a project?
Well, the first thing I would do is get local counsel if you can, because they have a good feel and temperature of what's going on locally, and find someone that can not necessarily sponsor your project, but be a local contact. Because a lot of times, if you're the developer sitting in Chicago and you have a project in middle of Montana, you're not going to be there every day. So you need somebody who is local. That's the first thing that I would recommend, or someone who knows the rules locally, and the people. That always helps out quite a bit.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We are going to move on. Heather, this question actually is going to be for you, and it goes back to the first poll question, not the intro, but the first one. According to the poll, most respondents here, about 38%, stated they are involved in the early site due diligence and development phase of renewable energy projects. What are some of the biggest challenges that consultants have dealt with during this phase?
A lot of issues that I've run into on the, most of my work is on the eastern seaboard, is the timing of the actual due diligence. If the projects are up north or in New England area, Northeast United States, for if you're doing an initial assessment of a greenfield or a brownfield site, really, for that matter, for wetlands or streams, you have to wait. You have to wait until thaw or growing season, onset of growing season, which can be sometimes as late in the year as late April, early May, even. So that's an issue on timing. Other T&E, like threatened and endangered species issues, if you've got a request from Fish and Wildlife to survey for a bat or even, some other small mammal, there might be seasonality issues with that to make sure you catch the data that you need when they are present. Same thing goes for plants, flowering periods. Sometimes the flowering period is just a couple of weeks. And so kind of getting back to what Ethan says, the earlier you can start your community relations, your public relations, that due diligence, the earlier you can start that, the better. If you can give yourself an entire year on a project, you're better off. Take care of that stuff, give yourself some time.
Great advice there. Delaney, we're going to go back to some other mitigation measures, questions surrounding that. So, in terms of mitigation measures and trend, what are some trends that you are currently occurring in the development of renewable energy projects? And I know this could change based on the year or based on different regulations or what a community has as their part of their goals in terms of incorporating renewable energy.
Yeah, so I think from a mitigation measures perspective, I would align with what Ethan and Heather have already said too, that any mitigations that you can put in place early around wetlands are very important. Adhering to the different setbacks that may be required in the jurisdiction that you're working in as a mitigation, those are generally very effective. I think what can end up happening is in a lot of cases, those setbacks, they're in place for they're very beneficial that you adhere to those setbacks, especially once you get to construction. So for example, if you have some wetlands and you decide that, like here in Alberta, we have a 100-meter setback on certain types of wetlands. You may decide that you want to be working within that setback and say reduce it to 30 meters, and that gets approved. What can end up happening during construction is that you can end up being in an area where we're going to have endangered or threatened amphibian species. So that is going to slow down your construction. There's going to be additional work that's needed to either relocate those amphibians or wait until they've moved out of the area. And so just adhering to those setbacks end up benefiting you in the long term and getting them right from the start. I mentioned wetlands. I think the other ones that are very important currently, and that kind of tie into some of the landowner concerns as well, is anything related to vegetation management. So weed management, getting vegetation established on site as early and as successfully as possible, and then soil management. So managing that soil to minimize erosion as well as maximize the likelihood that you're going to have a good establishment of the vegetation that's going to grow on the site for the duration of the project. Those would be some of the more major ones right now.
No, and all great advice. I'm sure some of the things that you mentioned too are items that not everybody would think about during the process. So it's good to have the vast information available to our attendees. Now, Chris, before I jump into questions directly, for you, did you have anything you wanted to add to any of the questions that our panelists have talked about at this point?
No, I'm going to stay in my lane and field questions related to funding.
That
So
sounds good.
yeah.
Our funding guru on with us today. So, what are some of the biggest challenges and lessons then that you have learned when preparing an EPA environmental and climate justice community change grant? And that's
New
a
program
mouthful.
is the big one. They put out these guidelines. I don't think anybody knew exactly when they were going to come out, but they came out last November, and we started talking to our client in Maine about a fit, for their project in December, and it honestly took us, all the way to June to submit the application. And so, anytime you're doing something new and there aren't templates or examples, it's a very collaborative process with folks from the regulatory agency, EPA, and then their network of technical assistance providers to kind of troubleshoot, the logistics of the program. Another challenge is that this is a new program and they're very specific that there won't be extensions given to folks. And so you essentially have $20 million, but you only have 3 years from the date your cooperative agreement starts to finish all the permitting, do all the construction, and show all the outcomes for the project. So it's in the real world, 3 years, I think folks know is not a lot of time to get everything done and do it well. And then the third one I'll say is, our clients, sanitary district, they manage wastewater for their residents, in their jurisdiction over a large area of Maine. And they had this project, designed, but we had to fit in the community-based organization involvement and partner with a collaborating partner, Defend Our Health, to bring in community voices into the PFAS situation in Maine, design a program where we can work with those stakeholders to actually conduct sampling of sediments and waters and stuff like that, and really bring in the community element to an engineering project essentially. So that's always a challenge, but we rose to the challenge and we got our application in and we passed the threshold criteria for the logistics of the grant, and we're awaiting our score from a merit-based standpoint. So knock on wood, we're hoping for good news here in the next little bit. And this is going to be a one-of-a-kind facility, a regional solution to treating PFAS, and could be a great example for other states and other sanitary districts throughout the country to do something similar. So I'll stop there. Those were 3.
Wonderful. No, and do you have a timeline of when you expect to hear?
They said roughly 45 to 90 days after you submit, and so I know that they're strongly motivated to award, as much of this funding as possible, by the 1-year anniversary date of the guidelines, which is going to be November 21st. They do allow for awards going all the way up till September 2026. So they're allowing a lot of time to work out the details and establish cooperative agreements with these clients. But they've only done one round of announcement, $350 million of the $2 billion totally available. So we're hopeful that we're going to be part of a second wave of announcements and that good news will come before Christmas. So.
Well, we hope so as well, and hopefully that you will be in touch to share that news with us whenever it comes. All right, we are going to jump into some other questions from the attendees today. Thank you for being on with us still. We have about 11 minutes, roughly about 10 minutes to answer as many questions as we can. So Heather, I'm going to start with you. And this is a question that we have talked about and we have covered at E&E Leader. What will happen to the panels after the end of life of this project? Will manufacturers take them down? Will they recycle them? What happens?
Yeah. All right. So many projects, most, if not all, that we've worked on have been decommissioned. So there are a number of recycling facilities popping up across the country that will take the panels at the end of their useful life. So it's usually about 20, 25 years, give or take, the make, model, manufacturer. Remove the panels, the posts, the wiring, everything, and take it to a recycling facility. Those facilities are certified, they're set up, they recycle the materials, and goes right back into either manufacturing or some other material for some other use. So decommissioning is part of most special use and conditional use permits. In order to be granted the permit to even build the project, you have to have a signed and sealed decommissioning plan, along with a decommissioning cost estimate that looks out 20, 25 years and estimates the value of what that's going to be costing the developer then at that point in time. So great question, and really appreciate it too, because there's a lot of kind of misinformation out there on the web and so on with panels and turbines, what happens to them at the end of their useful life. So thanks for the question.
No, wonderful. Yes. And I know I agree with you. There is a ton of misinformation and hopefully that won't always be the case, at least the amount of misinformation, but one never knows. So this question has to do with agriculture. I'm curious about issues arising out of the use of prior agricultural land for solar. Some jurisdictions expressly discourage it via permitting or otherwise, others encourage it. Some local communities favor it. People are all over the place when it comes to this. So, what are the issues and how do you handle those? Heather, I'm going to stay with you for that one. And then Delaney, I'd like to hear a little bit of a follow up as well.
Great. This is a huge issue. We are seeing this come up across the country. The use of prime farmland or prime agricultural land or active or even fallow agricultural land for solar battery energy storage. It's a large issue, but it's something that I want to convey to the listeners that we can work within. And that is because in order to meet our state's goals in greenhouse gas reduction, net zero reductions, the governor's bills and executive orders, we only need a fraction of 1% of that ag land to meet those goals. We are not talking about, a change in all land use of ag land to solar. I think it's a big misunderstanding. It's out there. A lot of folks they come to the hearings and they're concerned that the whole entire county that they might be in is going to become a solar field. And that's just not the case. We're not seeing that. And I've been in the space for 10 years now, been to dozens and dozens of hearings, and across the landscape, you do see solar fields pop up more, but it's not the dominant land use type. And I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is to meet our emissions goals. And so I think it's on us as consultants and researchers and educators to send the message that at least in my opinion, solar is best on ag fields because solar in forests cuts trees down, and we're almost kicking ourselves in the foot by cutting down trees to put up solar panels. So I guess that's my 2 cents. Love to hear Delaney's Canadian perspective.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing, Heather. I think, yeah, there's a balance needed between the different land uses. We're in the similar situation where the amount of land that's going to be used for renewables it's not what I think people are assuming it is. And I think in addition to that, I would go back to some of the work that should be done by developers to ensure that we're picking the right lands for these projects. And so that means lands that have as few wetlands as possible, that are on lower quality agricultural lands where they can be, or they're going to be co-located with either things like sheep, like Ethan was mentioning, or they're going to be doing agrovoltaics or those sorts of things. Like there are other things coming to the industry that I think also will improve it even more in that regard. So that, yeah, I think I agree with Heather that it's a big issue. In certain ways, it's been overblown, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to pick the right sites to balance all the competing priorities that we have for any of our land.
Thank you for that. And I know we have more questions coming in about ag land, and don't worry, the panelists will be able to follow up with you. I do want to try to get to a couple of other topics because this is one actually I put down in my notes when I was listening, as well as it came in from a couple of our listeners. Ethan, this question's for you, and it goes back to when you talked about changing the color of the blades, making them black. So there are companies looking to study painting turbine blades, and they're
Mhm.
curious to know how this worked for your projects and whether the paint added any additional weight or whether it conducted heat into the nacelles.
Uh, Great question. All great questions. We're still trying to analyze a lot of these um, because it is so new, right? There's a handful of projects that are working on it. There's one out here in Wyoming that is in existence. I think it's been up for about a year and a half near Glen Rock. Um, we're keeping track of that. So far, they haven't had any issues. One of the recommendations for the paint was to put an equal amount of white paint to offset the balance, or to to create a balance of those three blades. Um, it is literally such a new concept that we are working with the Fish and Wildlife Service on it, and because it would be uh, mitigation that is relatively new, it would probably be reviewed, to be studied, and to see if it's actually going to work. Right? I'm not 100% about the heat, um, but my client is a pretty big client, and they're still working on it and trying to figure out how to adapt to it because um, you saw that map that I had on my project, on our project. There's a lot of activity, and so avian activity, and so they're trying to minimize the impact as best as possible, without having to curtail anything. The wind is crazy good up there, but at what cost, right? So yeah, so right now we're analyzing a lot of those. We're still probably another year away from approval. So like I said, it's 3 to 4 years for some of these, and I'll let you know when it comes out.
Wonderful. And we are almost out of time. I do want to give the panelists about 30 seconds to 45 seconds each to kind of give one or two key takeaways they would like our attendees to leave with today. And again, as a reminder, this is going to be available on demand for you to watch after the event. So, Chris, why don't I start with you?
I am here to support folks. So I am on a mission to help the EPA find a good use for this $2 billion of funding and hopefully show great outcomes and make sure that it's not a one-time program. So yeah, please reach out to me if you're trying to invent the wheel and blaze the trail, because we've got some experience to share and can help you. So that's it for me.
Wonderful. Ethan, why don't we hear from you, then Delaney, and finish up with Heather?
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned it already. Talk to the local folks, the commissioners, the township, get as much information from them before you can do your CIAs, your initial studies, but if you think it's going to work, definitely try to get a feel, especially these newer areas. Right, we're going through these new areas, these new counties, and finding all kinds of issues. The second thing is a lot of landowners, ranchers, farmers, they need this to survive on some of their properties. That's what we're finding out west, because property taxes are increasing in certain areas. This is their only way to preserve their property into perpetuity for their kids. So that's the other thing that we're seeing quite a bit.
I think I'm up next, and so I would just reiterate what Ethan said of talking to folks, and I would add one slight nuance to it of talking to landowners as well to get any information that they have on their lands, make sure that they're as engaged in the process as possible, and that folks can go out and survey the areas and the concerns that they have. And then, yeah, I think that would be my major one.
I guess just to add, I wanted to kind of recap or reiterate what Chris Gadak had said about the $2 billion in EPA funding if you've got a brownfield site. And remember, the brownfield definition is very wide. It could be a mine, it could be a landfill, capped landfill. There's lots of latitude in the definition of a brownfield. And it's got a potential, if there's some interconnection or structural infrastructure near it that makes it suitable for maybe a battery energy storage site or a solar site or a wind site, please reach out to us. Start with Chris Gadak. He's our expert. And we can't reiterate that more. And other stuff with just site design, like I said earlier, start early in your process. Try to add a year at the front. Get yourself real familiar with your project. Go out and see it. Go out, stand there, stare at it, get to know it, get to know those neighbors, get a consultant on board that knows the lay of the land. Start early and stick with that due diligence to get your permits and everything. Keep it on time. So I could keep going, but
Great. No, great advice to leave our attendees with today. I want to thank those who were able to join us live and those who will be watching this on demand. If you could, there's a quick survey that's going to pop up on your screen when we end the event. We would love any and all feedback. Feel free to submit additional questions in that survey as well. We appreciate again you being on with us, and we look forward to the next event with Montrose and their partners. So have a wonderful day, everybody. Enjoy hopefully some nice weather where you live. So thanks again.